All right. Welcome back. We are going to be picking up where we left off, uh, talking about the rise of the National Socialist German Workers' Party and Adolf Hitler. Hitler has, at this point, essentially left his post with the military and has taken on a leadership role within the NSDAP. And as he's doing that, things in Germany start to go from bad to worse, which is going to turn more and more people away from the democratic German government in Weimar and turn, most Americans toward, or Americans, I'm sorry, most Germans towards more radical forms of government, including communism and socialism. The first thing that happens is that Germany's struggling to pay back their reparations, their war reparations, as mandated by the Treaty of Versailles. The Germans, just their economy has been train wrecked, and it doesn't show very many signs of getting better, and they can't keep up with the reparations payments. Well, because of the worldwide depression, France, Belgium, and other countries, they're suffering too, and they want more. They want their payments, the payments that they feel entitled to. And so Germany starts to resort to, all kinds of crazy things to make these payments, but they're not going to be able to make them. And because of that, the French and the Belgians are going to send troops into the Ruhr Valley. What you have to understand about the Ruhr Valley is that it is one of the most resource rich parts of Germany. It has, all kinds of iron, which is, definitely iron and coal, which are two very important resources needed for industrialization. And so French troops essentially march into this German territory. The Germans aren't prepared to defend that. They can't because their military has been limited to 100,000 people. And so they, even if they wanted to, they couldn't stop the French and the Belgians from invading that area. Plus, this area, all the area of the Rhineland that the Ruhr Valley is located in, has been demilitarized. So, Germany's 100,000 person military is not even allowed into that part of their own country. The French and the Belgians come in and they just start to extract those resources in lieu of reparation payments. This is, absolutely devastating for the German people. They have to go to, imagine if you're working in the Ruhr Valley in one of these, iron mines, coal mines, or even in some of the factories where they're taking finished products, and you're working all day, and then another country just comes in and steals the stuff that you're working for. They're essentially forcing you to work at gunpoint. Uh, excuse me. This is not a good thing for Germany, and is going to push people, average Germans, towards political leaders that are using rhetoric that is more aggressive, talking about remilitarizing and defending what's German. Meanwhile, the Weimar government, the legitimate government of Germany, starts to be able to make these payments. They're going to start to print more money. The This is, kind of one of those things that governments try from time to time to be able to pay for, whether it's reparations or to pay debt payments or to pay off, government programs. Um, Governments will do this from time to time, but the negative effects almost always outweigh the positive effects. And so, what you start to see in Germany is inflation. And inflation is just when money starts to lose its value. If you print too much money, all of a sudden, what you're going to see is prices start to go up accordingly. You double the money supply in a country, almost certainly within time, you're going to see the prices of products double over that period of time. Now, inflation is normal. If it's in small amounts, inflation is nothing really to worry about. All adults have some story about how, when they were young, gas was, from, in my case, 85 cents a gallon. And now I just filled up today and I think it was $2.66 a gallon. Well, that's because of inflation. And when it's a small thing done over a small period of time, you barely even notice it. It's not a big deal. Generally, your pay increases with the rise in prices. And so it's not a thing that you need to worry about. But because Germany just goes crazy with the printing and they just dump a ton of money out all at one time, we start to not just only see inflation, we start to see hyperinflation. So if inflation is when money loses its value, hyperinflation is when that's just absolutely out of control. And so what you see here on the PowerPoint slide is, in November of 1918, a loaf of bread cost 1 Deutschmark. Just for our purposes, it's the German dollar. By 1922, a loaf of bread, so you're talking 4 years later, a loaf of bread is 163 Deutschmarks. Now that seems crazy. I mean, if a loaf of bread went from $1 to $163 in America, that would seem crazy. But then what you really start to see is by the early 20s, and keep in mind, this is before the stock market crashes in America. By September of 23, so roughly a year later, a loaf of bread becomes, 1.5 million Deutschmarks. And then by November 1923, I mean, what are we looking at there? That's million, the 200 billion Deutschmarks for a loaf of bread. I mean, that's beyond ridiculous, right? What you start to see in the 1923 is that for people to go grocery shopping, they literally, to buy a limited amount of items, will fill a wheelbarrow filled with cash and take it to the grocery store to be able to buy just a few items. And when they get there, they realize that the wheelbarrow's worth more than the cash that's in it. And so, by the time you get to 1923, money in Germany is almost certainly useless. At the height of inflation, you're going to, excuse me, you're going to see $1 being able to purchase 4 trillion Deutschmarks. The German economy has essentially moved back into a barter and trade system. What you see here is money almost becomes a joke. Buying children's toys. Well, it's just, instead of buying, Lincoln Logs for whatever the German equivalent is to Lincoln Logs, so Otto von Bismarck logs, I don't know. Instead of buying toy bricks, people will block up money and let their children play with that. You see on the picture on the right here, kids making kites out of money. We know that for a lot of Germans, it's cheaper to use cash to wallpaper their walls than it is to buy actual wallpaper. But I think the most telling picture is going to be this one. This is a German woman, using money to heat her home. It's actually cheaper to burn cash than it is to go out and buy firewood. This is going to make the German people incredibly desperate, right? The idea is that cash has become, almost useless, and they need stability in their economy. The average German worker, inflation is happening so fast that when they go to work every day, they actually have to negotiate their wages 3 different times within the day. Twice within the day. The first time is they show up, and generally speaking, they show up with their wife. And the workers and the employer negotiate a wage for the first half of the day up until about lunch. when they reach an agreed upon number, the workers have to be paid up front, because if they don't get the money right away and head to the grocery store immediately, prices will go up so extremely high that the money that they got in the morning won't be worth enough to be able to purchase their lunch by lunchtime. And so they'll take the cash up front, they'll hand it over to their wives. Their wives would then run to the grocery store to try and be able to buy lunch for the family. So when the worker gets to his lunch break, the wife comes back, brings the lunch to the worker. The worker then renegotiates his wages for the afternoon, again getting paid up front, because to be able to buy groceries for dinner, they're going to have to get that money right away, run to the grocery store again, and be able to purchase their food right then, because by the time 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening rolls around, prices will have risen so much that the money they earned is useless. And so, this kind of economy can't last long. And it just can't, because the people won't tolerate the conditions that are allowing this to happen. And so it's making people desperate. And Hitler is going to really try and take advantage of that. Now, he's not the only, the NSDAP, I should say, is not the only political organization that is taking advantage of these trying times. The communists are as well. And so, the communists are talking about taking over the economy, taking from the rich, redistributing to the poor. So it really, because of this hyperinflation, we start to see in Germany a fight between these two different political ideologies, the Nazis and the communists. There are fears within the middle class that that there's going to be a communist coup and a communist takeover, and Hitler is going to be the one that offers protection from that. Hitler and the Nazi Party are going to start to tell people that the Nazis are the protecting force that are going to hold back the tide of communism. And so it's right around this point that Hitler thinks that Germany is ripe for a coup, and he starts to plan uh, his own coup, and he's taken the lead from Mussolini, right? Mussolini and his black shirts had the March on Rome, and it was a relatively peaceful coup. And Hitler thinks he can do the same thing with the Nazis. Hitler won't be using black shirts, but the Nazi Party has their own paramilitary organization that he ever so creatively calls the brown shirts. Those are the Nazi thugs that are running around the neighborhoods and beating up the communists. A lot of times they're unemployed men, tend to be very nationalistic. Maybe they're World War I vets, or, a lot of times they're just unemployed young men. And so Hitler is trying to recreate Mussolini's March on Rome. He knows that he's going to need some help with that. And so most people around Germany don't know who the Nazis are, and they don't know who Hitler is, right? But Hitler knows he's got a sympathetic friend in Erich Ludendorff. Erich Ludendorff is a World War I veteran and is actually, probably one of the most famous people in Germany. He escapes World War I with his reputation intact, and he has sympathetic leanings towards the Nazi Party and their ideas of nationalism and revoking the dreaded Treaty of Versailles. And so Hitler gets together with Ludendorff and other Nazi followers, and they meet in a beer hall in Munich. This is why this failed coup attempt is called the beer hall putsch. So Hitler, Ludendorff, and other Nazi followers, their plan is to meet at this beer hall in Munich and march to Berlin. They believe that the people, when hearing about this, will rise up, and as they rise up, will support the Nazis, and he will be able to relatively easily overthrow the Weimar Republic. The problem with this is Germany has been preparing this for a long time. The reason Hitler was able to keep his job within the military was because the Weimar has been, very concerned about coups in Germany, and so the Weimar Republic, gets notice that Hitler's going to attempt this. They know it's going to happen before it happens, and so when Hitler and the Nazis and Ludendorff walk out of the beer hall and are trying to march triumphantly to Berlin to get the people to rise up, they leave the beer hall, they turn the corner, and bam. The German police are there to quickly put an end to his attempted coup. Now, lucky for Hitler, Ludendorff is a national figure and a national hero, and so the military is not just going to open up fire on these leaders and risk killing Ludendorff. So the Germans end up arresting everybody. They kind of let Ludendorff escape because they don't want to embarrass him, and Hitler will end up getting arrested. Now, what happens next is critical because at this point, Hitler's going to be arrested and sentenced to 5 years in jail. And so, you would think, bam, this would be the end of Hitler's career. But Hitler is nothing if he's not an opportunist. And so before he gets his 5-year sentence, there has to be a trial. And so Hitler does kind of the unthinkable. The German government wants to cut a deal with him. They don't want this to go to trial. They want to sweep this under the rug and pretend like it never happened. And they keep offering him deal after deal after deal. And Hitler says, no, I want to go to trial. And the case proceeds to trial. And because Hitler wants to go to trial because he knows that it will become national news. And Hitler wants to use this as essentially a PR campaign for the Nazi party. And so he goes to trial and he actually is going to take the stand and to defend himself. And so when they're asking him questions like, did you attempt to overthrow the German government? Hitler says, yes. Not only yes, but hell yes. I attempted to overthrow the Weimar. The Weimar is the one that negotiated this terrible Treaty of Versailles. They're the ones that allowed one of the world's greatest militaries to be reduced to essentially a police force. The Weimar is the government that is trying to pay back these reparations and causing all these problems with inflation. He says, not only did I do it, he says, I'm not sorry that I did. He says it's time somebody stands up and says enough is enough and stands up for the average German. And he said, that's what I'm here to do. And if I have to go to jail to stand up for you, the average German, then that's what I'm going to do. And all of a sudden, Hitler goes from a nobody, somebody that nobody has ever heard of, to a nationwide figure essentially overnight. Every newspaper in Germany is reporting on this attempted coup, right? And the average German person is now waking up every morning reading the newspaper and saying, you know what? This guy might be right. We're being abused here. And if we're being abused, then, we need somebody strong to, take the reins of power and take over the government. And so Hitler is really he's playing the strong man. He's, saying your government is weak. I'm strong. You should, you should be backing people like me, not like the people that are in power. And all of a sudden, Hitler's personal popularity is going to dramatically increase because of this trial. Now, he will be sent to jail. But because public opinion is so against his 5 year sentence, he will be released after only serving 1 year. And so Hitler takes what should have been a disaster for him and turns it into a triumph. This is really, the Nazi Party, the NSDAP, was a joke before the beer hall putsch. After the beer hall putsch, Hitler looks like the guy that's standing up for the average German in a time where the average German really feels like they need somebody to be standing up for them. Now, while he's in prison, he's going to write one of the most famous books of all time, Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf, translated into English, is My Struggle. And he's going to discuss several important things in this book. He's going to talk about, the kind of the struggles of the German people, and he's going to lay out kind of his vision for the future of Germany. One of the most important, he's going to telegraph some of the things that the Nazis are going to later do. One of the first things, most important things that he talks about here is this idea of Lebensraum. Lebensraum just means living space. He says in this book, the Germans and the Aryan people are the superior race, but he says that Germany failed during World War I because they're essentially, for the most part, landlocked. They don't have enough room and resources. One of the problems during World War I is that Germany didn't have enough food to feed themselves. And so he says we need to expand. And he says most of that expansion should be towards the east and into land controlled by the Soviet Union. Again, another kind of rubbing point between Hitler and Joseph Stalin. So this idea that Hitler is eyeballing the Soviet Union and territory there, and he's itching to invade, he completely telegraphs that. And he also realizes and talks about in his book that that a coup in Germany just isn't going to work. That if he's going to come to power, it is most certainly going to have to be through the electoral process. And so he essentially lays out his plan to get elected. One of the other very important things that he does in Mein Kampf is he starts to talk about Jewish conspiracies. He lays that out. By the time Mein Kampf comes out, he's publicly blaming Jews for the problems in Germany, which there's no evidence for. And he starts to connect the Jews with the Soviet Union. He coins a term called Judeo-Bolshevism. The Bolsheviks are the Bolshevik Revolution. In Russia, the Bolsheviks are communists, and he starts to connect these two groups, and essentially says that the Jews and their conspiracy to take over the world financially, and he links them to communism, and he's going to play up the connection between the founder of communism, Karl Marx, and who really invented communism, who was a German Jew, and so he links those kind of those two things together in Mein Kampf. He also is going to start to advocate for the removal of Jews from Germany within this book. Now, he's not going to be talking about like mass extinction. He's not going to be talking about genocide here. Because he knows the German, even though most historians agree that he's probably contemplating ideas like that, he knows that the German people just aren't there yet. Later when we talk about the Holocaust, we'll talk about his plan and how methodical it was, how it really started very simply with small things and then slowly built on itself over time until it became a genocide. But he is in Mein Kampf telegraphing that he does have plans to get Jews out of Germany. All right. So we've got here, I'll read this to you really quick. This is an excerpt from Mein Kampf. It is thus necessary that the individual should come to realize that his own ego is of no importance in comparison with the existence of his nation. Right. So that means you as an individual citizen, your rights and privileges are not nearly as important as the survival of our country. That the position of the individual ego is conditioned solely by the interest of the nation as a whole. That above all, the unity of a nation's spirit and will are worth far more than the freedom of the spirit and will of the individual. Essentially, he's telegraphing a dictatorship here, right? He's saying that if the government is going to be strong enough to fix these economic problems, you're going to have to give up liberty and freedom. And that's just what he says it is. Democracy has failed you. You need to, if you want to survive this, you're going to have to hand over that power to the government. So Mein Kampf really telegraphing he's going to invade the Soviet Union. He is got nasty plans for the Jews, and that he is going to establish a totalitarian dictatorship. But to do that, he's going to have to get elected into office first. And so as the Nazis start to develop here and start to grow as an actual national German party, we're going to see that he's going to need his, ground troops. We've talked about this group before, the brown shirts. This is modeled after Mussolini's black shirts. They also get the name stormtroopers. If you've ever watched any Star Wars movies ever, there are definitely similarities between the Empire and the Nazi Party. It's no coincidence that George Lucas called his the Empire's troops stormtroopers. These are the SA troops. So we've got three names: the SA, stormtroopers, brown shirts. I will use brown shirts. It's just easier for me to remember. And they're going to be organized by this handsome gentleman here in the top right corner. And this is Ernst Röhm. Ernst Röhm is really just a thug. He's very violent. He's going to use his brown shirts to run around neighborhoods and to beat up communists. They're the boots on the ground, thug forces that Hitler is going to be using. When the Nazi Party has any kind of political rallies or anything of that nature, it's going to be the brown shirts that are going to come in and organize parades. They're going to hand out pamphlets. They're going to be, kind of the announcing force for any kind of political rally. Now, other leaders within the Nazi party group are going to be Joseph Goebbels and Heinrich Himmler. The Joseph Goebbels to the left, he's really the political and propaganda mastermind of the Nazi party. He's going to be the guy that is going to, orchestrate the election of Adolf Hitler. He is the one pushing the propaganda that the Jews are the problems, that it's not, the average German. He's going to handle Hitler's election, and he's going to do it in extremely innovative ways. He very much understands the power of, the power of propaganda. He's going to change really politics around the world forever. We'll talk about how that happens a little bit later. He's also one of the people that convinces Hitler that the Nazi Party really needs to be promoted as a right-wing ideology. which is what we still call fascism today, even though the Nazis are actually socialists. He says, he and Hitler both agree that if they are going to use the fear of communism as a way to get elected, they can't point out how similar their style of government is to communism. And so what they do is they play down the socialist aspects. They play down the idea that the Nazis want to control the economy. They want to be able to have extreme government power. All things that are associated with socialism, and they start to play up the couple of aspects of the Nazi Party that are right wing, which is extreme patriotism and nationalism. And so they kind of paint the Nazi Party as this far right party. Which is a genius idea that is going to get is ultimately going to get Hitler elected. I think today we all would wish that he wasn't so good at his job, right? The guy on the right, Heinrich Himmler. Himmler is the guy that is eventually going to be in charge of the police forces for the Nazi Party. He will, he's a trusted advisor to Adolf Hitler, and is going to be the guy that is in charge of the Gestapo. The Gestapo, or the German police force. And so he will later be in charge of the SS as well. And the SS are going to be the most radical members of the Nazi Party. They're going to be the ones that are in charge of orchestrating the death camps, the work camps, and the death camps, the concentration camps. So the Nazis, they're on the rise. They still have to get elected. And what we're going to see is that the Nazis are really going to use, this idea of populism to reach out to the average German citizen, an average German voter. Hitler and Joseph Goebbels are going to really start what is, today is not uncommon. They're going to create this idea of the perpetual campaign, that they're going to have, they're going to be campaigning for election, have political rallies, year-round events all day long. They're going to try to appeal to the average German worker. They're going to have these massive rallies all across the country. They're going to have public works projects here. The picture that you're looking at right here is Hitler out and laying the groundwork for what will later be the Autobahn, the German highway system. And so it's designed to make Hitler look like a man of the people. Clearly this is very orchestrated photograph. The Nazis are going to innovate politics. They're going to change the way that political people campaign. Most of politics throughout this point in history, the people that are running for office have surrogates campaign for them. They might give a few speeches. They might send out some letters, but politics was this really like hoity-toity elitist thing. And so, Hitler and Goebbels are really going to bring politics down to the local level, and they're going to do it in a very orchestrated way. And so one of the things that they do is to get people to Nazi rallies is, they're going to, announce them as these big social events. And so what they would do is they would go into a town and they would rent out the second largest beer hall or public space, and very specifically the second largest public space, because when they would have these events, they absolutely want the space to be packed. They want the pictures to look where everybody's crammed together. They want long lines out of the door. They definitely don't want to get the largest space and have people see empty seats. They're trying to hype up Adolf Hitler. And so they rent these smaller spaces to jam everybody in, and then they make it an event. And so, they'll say, Hitler's going to speak tonight at 9:00. And But in the meantime, come and listen to music, and they would have musicians playing. They would provide free food and beer, and so it really kind of becomes a night out. And so they say, "Hey, come take the family, and go to this free or extremely cheap event, and then listen to what some of our people have to say." And so, it really, when they come in, the brown shirts get there a week ahead of time. They're handing out flyers. They're hyping the crowd up to get as many people there as possible. They're making the experience personal to the average German person. The Nazis, Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels, will invent direct mail. And so, today we get direct mail all the time. You get a form letter, it's got your name at the top, and it's like, says something, trying to sell you car insurance or something. And then at the bottom, it's signed President and CEO of the company, right? And we get those letters and we know that's not written by the CEO. That's just a form letter and we throw it away. Well, Hitler and Goebbels invented that. The brown shirts would show up into the town before these big rallies, and they would go and steal the local German phone book. Because that local German phone book would have the names of all the people that live in town, their telephone numbers, but the German phone book also listed their occupation. And so the Nazis had a form letter for farmers. They had a form letter for industrial workers, for bankers, for any teachers, any career you can think of. They had a form letter for, and they would match the person to the form letter. And so all an assistant would have to do is, at the top right, "Dear Mr. Garrison," at the top of the form letter for teachers, and then sign it Adolf Hitler at the bottom. Now imagine if you're the first people to get that kind of letter. You legitimately think that this, famous politician wrote the letter for you. Like, nobody's heard of these kind of direct mailers before. And they also promised everything to everybody. Hitler only wants to get elected. He does not care about following through with his promises, because as soon as he gets into power, he's just going to dismantle democracy. And so, a lot of times what's good for farmers is bad for industrialists, right? And so, they would be promising, farmers one thing and industrialists the complete opposite. And because he just wants to make everybody happy so he can get elected, and not caring whether he makes good on those promises. So all these people get hyped up. They feel like, oh my God, Hitler knows who I am. The Nazi party knows who I am. And they're having this big party. Let's take the family. Times are hard right now. Let's go get this free meal and let's listen to what they have to say. And then what Goebbels has Hitler do is really put on what is tantamount to a rock show, right? And so when Hitler is coming in, he doesn't just show up early, right? I mean, Beyonce would never show up to a concert early, right? So what they would do is they would have a hype man get on the stage, a couple hours before the event, and they'd say, hey, welcome to the beer hall in Munich. We're super excited to have you tonight. Hitler's on his way from Berlin. He should be here in a couple hours. And in the meantime, listen to this speaker. And then, they would have a warm-up act that would come on. And every once in a while, they would start to make announcements like, Hitler has got off his plane in Berlin. He's in his car. He'll be here in an hour, right? And so he building up the hype in these audiences. In the meantime, the entire town is showed up, and so the hall that Hitler's going to speak in is cramped. There's a line out the door, and the Nazis want this because they want it photographed for the newspapers, and so they set up speakers outside, out front, and so it looks like this place is just mobbed, and hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, show up, and they're standing outside, standing room only, listening to the speakers, and then if Hitler's supposed to talk at 9:00. Clearly, he doesn't show up at 9. He's going to make people wait. Because a rock star never shows up on time. They always start a little bit late to make their grand entrance. And then Hitler, when he finally arrives, the announcement gets made, Hitler is in the building, and the doors open up and a mob kind of surrounds him. And then he walks up to the stage. And then that's when we really start to see Hitler's skills as an orator. he knows how to engage his audience. And so when he starts speaking, the first thing he does is he just stands there and he lets the crowd roar, right? And he just stands there and waits for them to kind of calm down. And then when he starts speaking, he really makes an effort to start his speeches with a very calm demeanor. He doesn't yell. He's not screaming, right? He's talking kind of, very slowly, uh, without a lot of volume, because he knows that as he does that, his listeners are drawn into him. Everybody's got to get dead silent if you're going to hear him, and everybody's got to squeeze up to the front of the stage. Everybody's kind of got to lean in. And then as Hitler continues speaking, he slowly gets a little bit louder and a little bit louder. And then by the time he gets to the part of his speech where he starts talking about how great the German people is, and he starts telling the crowd so that you Germans have done nothing wrong. It is not your failure. It's the betrayal of the German people by the Weimar that have caused all your problems. By this point, he's yelling and he's screaming and he's passionate, and his hands are banging against the podium and he's pointing. And by this time, the crowd's just absolutely going nuts, right? They're just whipped up into this frenzy. They're being told about how great they are and how they were betrayed, and that if you just support Hitler, then he will restore you to your former glory. And the people buy it, right? I mean, we're unfortunately, we're as humans are relatively easily manipulated, and Hitler kind of plays everybody like a fiddle at these events, and people go home and they're just like, they've never experienced politics like that before. They had this like raucous event where they were probably a little bit drunk. They got this food. They feel like Hitler knows them as a person, and then Hitler just gets on his plane and flies to the next city, sometimes doing 2 or 3 cities in a day, and the newspapers are reporting. Nobody's ever done that before, right? Nobody's ever flown from event to event. And so he's doing events all across the country, and people start to think like, how can he have been in Munich and Berlin in the same day? Like, how is he, in all these different places, and like he's up in Danzig, and then like, how is this possible? There's this like aura that starts to build around Adolf Hitler. And keep in mind, it's all based on lies. He's telling everybody everything that they want to hear, even when those things are just logically not possible. But people are willing to believe it. The photographs and images of Hitler are 100% gone over with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that it's a 100% orchestrated, right? I mean, Hitler really, politicians have always, shaken a million hands and kissed a million babies, but Hitler's going to take it to the next level. He understands the importance of photography, and so he gets himself photographed in situations to make him look like a man of the people, where he's with, you see on the left, small children, or on the right, trying to make Hitler look like a heartthrob. They surround him by, young, attractive women, and they're apparently trying to make him look coy. I don't know. I think he looks creepy, but you get the point. They're trying to make him look like a heartthrob, and Goebbels is the one kind of orchestrating all this and making sure that Hitler's always every photograph of him is exactly the image that the Nazi Party wants out there. And so we're going to see that as the Nazi Party starts to gain influence, that by 1932, Hitler is going to start to challenge the president, Hindenburg. Hindenburg is one of those guys like Ludendorff. He is a hero of World War I. He is, in fact, the most popular person in Germany. Hitler's challenging Hindenburg. He knows he can't win, but he also knows that if he stops running for office, then people will forget about him. And so he's challenging Hindenburg, and he's just hoping not to lose by too much. The Hindenburg is a president. So in Germany, you've got your president here who doesn't do the day-to-day work, right? But essentially got veto power over every other political position. And then you have your chancellor that's like right under, okay, that's weird. So you got president, and then you've got your chancellor, and the chancellor's like right under the president, and it's the chancellor that does the day-to-day decision making. And so Hitler's running for president because it doesn't matter what you do as chancellor. If the president doesn't like it, the president can veto it. And so in the election of 1932, the Reichstag elections, and remember the Reichstag is the German version of Congress, the Nazis are going to win 239 seats. Hitler does lose to Hindenburg, but it's at this point that the Nazis are essentially in control of the chancellorship. And so it's at this point he's going to have to, because he doesn't actually have enough votes to become chancellor. He's got to form a coalition government, and he's got to get Hindenburg's approval before he gets named chancellor. And so what he does is he essentially goes to Hindenburg and he pulls another great political move, and he tells Hindenburg, you know what, Hindenburg, I know you don't like me as chancellor. And Hindenburg does not like him. He doesn't trust him. He thinks he's, that Adolf Hitler's weaselly. Hindenburg is right. But Hitler gives him a deal, and he says, you know what, Hindenburg, I'll let you appoint all the people that you want to appoint to power with two exceptions. He wants to be able to name the Minister of the Interior, and he wants to be able to name the Interior Minister of Prussia. So Germany's been split into two, and so Prussia's kind of like its own little thing. And Hindenburg says, really, you're going to give me all that political power? And Hitler says, sure. Now, the question you might ask, well, what's so important about these interior ministers? Because that is important. The interior ministers are the people in charge of the police. And if you're looking to overthrow a government, you've got to have two groups of people on your side. You have to have the police and you have to have the military, right? Both of those things are problems for Hitler, right? But now that he has appointed both interior ministers, they automatically start to hire Nazis, right? And so a lot of your former brown shirts, not all of them, the brown shirts are still a huge organization. There's actually over 1 million brown shirts. But Nazis start to get appointed as policemen, and not just any policemen, positions of power and authority within the police. And so Hitler is consolidating his power essentially by making sure that all the people with guns are loyal to him, right? Now, that's going to get the police on his side. He also has to get the military on his side. And the problem is the military does not like the Nazi party right now. Even though the Nazis are pro-military, the military feels threatened by the Nazi party. The military only has 100,000 members. The brown shirts have 1 million. The Nazis are threatening the military. The military feels like this Nazi party, if they want to rise up and overthrow the military, they're afraid that they can, because there are more brown shirts than there are members of the German military. And so, even though Hitler's able to appoint his people as interior ministers, we still see that the military is kind of standing that. Two things. The military and Hindenburg are standing in his way from a dictatorship. And that's when, again, the fates seem to line up and, give Hitler another opportunity. And that's going to be the Reichstag fire. The Reichstag fire is, the Congress for Germany. And we've got elections coming up in 1933 to give you the context of events here. And so, and Goebbels actually goes to Hitler and says, you're chancellor now. You can't promise everything to everybody, because either you're going to help farmers or you're going to help the industrialists, right? But you can't. you can't give both of those groups everything you promised them. And as soon as you help the one, the others are going to betray you. And Goebbels just says, we're just not going to be able to pull off another election the way we pulled off before. And, Hitler is looking around and he's like, oh, man, we're going to have to figure something out. Now, at the same time, there are rumors that the communists are going to attempt to start a civil war. Hitler is playing up that possibility. And he's saying, look, you got to keep me in power. I'm going to protect you for these communists. And then the Reichstag catches on fire. And they catch a communist, at the building, who we believe did it. And now, I want to be clear here. They do catch a communist at the building, and he did start the fire. Now, this is not an orchestrated event. We know that the guy that starts this fire has mental illness. He is not coordinating activities with any kind of communist groups, but the Nazis are opportunists here. And so the Nazis see an opportunity and they seize it. They say, oh, we now have a national emergency. And Hitler goes to Hindenburg and says, hey, we if we're going to deal with this, if we're going to stop this civil war, the one that the Nazis told you was coming, right? The government needs special power. And so they're going to suspend freedom of speech and freedom of the press. And then the Nazis use this as an opportunity to go after their political rivals. And they start just rounding up any kind of resistance, primarily communists, right? And so Hitler is using this to expand the powers of the police, limit personal freedoms, and to go after communists. And the German people in general endorse that, right? They're terrified of a civil war. They're terrified of, communists taking over. And so this makes Hitler look strong, like the strong leader that they've always wanted. And so we see another election in 1933. The Nazis win 288 seats. And so, things are starting to look better for the Nazi party. But there's not everybody is a Nazi. The communists pick up 81 seats. But because of this national emergency and the blame that the communists got for the Reichstag fire, Hitler essentially doesn't allow these communists to take their seat in the Reichstag, right, within the parliament. And so at this point, Hitler says, look, this national emergency, we've suspended freedom of speech, we've suspended freedom of press, but, Hitler goes to Hindenburg again and he says, I need more power if I'm going to be able to take, to handle this situation. And Hindenburg, again, because it's a national emergency, even though he doesn't really want to, is going to start to hand over more power to Hitler. And Hitler is going to get the Enabling Act passed, which essentially gives Hitler dictatorial powers. Now, these dictatorial powers do have a time limit on it. It will run out eventually, but in the meantime, Hitler is going to continue to be able to consolidate power. He starts a policy of Gleichschalten, which is essentially, it gets translated as coordination, but Gleichschalten is this program where everything in society has to be what I would call Nazified. I don't know that that's a real word, but everything has to be a part of the Nazi party. And so at this point, textbooks have to be Nazi party approved. We start to see, Hitler Youth. If you want to play soccer, it's got to be Hitler Youth Soccer. And essentially the Nazi party starts to take control over everyday aspects of life. And it's going to start to use that as an indoctrination tool in the public. Right. So Germany's becoming more and more Nazified, right? The Nazi party is exerting more and more influence over the people, but he's still not a true dictator yet because Hindenburg is in the way, and Hindenburg doesn't trust Hitler, and Hitler knows it. And this is, again, it's another one of those tragic twists of fate in history, where it just almost seems like World War II is inevitable, because, again, Hindenburg is gonna be president as long as he wants to be president. And Hindenburg, even though he's handed over a bunch of power to Hitler, still doesn't trust him and still has the constitutional authority to end the Enabling Act kind of whenever he wants, and to dissolve the Nazi Party rule. He still has those powers. And then, bam, Hindenburg dies. And when Hindenburg dies, really, there's only one more obstacle in the way. And so when Hindenburg dies, Hitler's going to name himself president. He's going to take on the title Der Führer, or the leader. He's only, with Hindenburg gone, there's only one more group of people that are standing in his way, and that's the military, right? So Hitler starts to round up all of his political rivals. He takes the communists and socialists and liberals and starts to throw them into concentration camps. These are the first victims of the concentration camps. Concentration camps originally were not for the Jews. Hitler's going to want to use them for the Jews, no doubt about it. But they're not the threat yet. The threat are his political enemies. And so the political enemies will be the first to go, particularly the young ones, right? Again, it's the young, politically active men are the most likely to riot and overthrow their government. And so Hitler starts to round them up, but he needs the support of the military to do that. And that's when we get an event called the Night of the Long Knives. The thing that's keeping the military from supporting Hitler are the brown shirts, led by Ernst Röhm. And so what Hitler does is he orchestrates the assassination of Ernst Röhm. And so the leaders of the brown shirts are essentially assassinated, and he dissolves the brown shirts. And then he goes to the military and he says, I don't need this paramilitary organization anymore, because, I'm in your corner. And it's at this point that the military leaders swear allegiance to Hitler, not Germany, Hitler. Right. And so it's at this point that the Nazi Party and Hitler has established himself a totalitarian dictatorship. He's going to start to dismantle democracy, and there's no one left to stop him. All right. That is the story of how Hitler came to power. I think it's an interesting story, and it's interesting because he didn't take over in a coup. He got himself elected, and he got himself elected because of a bad economy and because of fear, the fear in the general electorate. We spent a lot of time talking about how Hitler got elected. And I think it's important that we do that because we have to understand as humans that when our economy and our ability to take care of our friends and family and loved ones starts to deteriorate, we all become scared. And, when we become scared like that, people can take advantage of that fear. If it can happen in Germany, really, it can happen anywhere. And so this is a thing that democracies are just vulnerable to. It's important that we learn about how Hitler got himself elected, because we need to make sure that we don't allow a travesty like that to happen again. All right. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And I will see you tomorrow.